Western Front, 1944. A Panther tank advances along a narrow route with the assurance of something built to dominate space. Its engine note is steady, confident, practiced. Steel plates overlap at deliberate angles. The long gun points forward like an argument already decided. Inside, the crew moves by habit rather than discussion. This machine is not rushed. It is doing what it was designed to do: move forward, impose weight, survive contact. For the men inside, mass equals safety. 50 tons of armor turns hedgerows into splinters and shrugs off rifle fire that would tear lighter vehicles apart. Experience has taught them that most dangers announce themselves. A muzzle flash, a crater, the unmistakable geometry of an anti-tank ditch. The Panther's weight is not just protection, it is reassurance. It allows the crew to believe that the ground itself will yield. Then the left track meets something it cannot read. There is no warning, no visible threat. Just a sudden resistance where momentum expects compliance. Mud hides the edge of a collapsed culvert or the lip of a bomb-softened trench. At speed, there is no time for correction. The suspension compresses unevenly. The nose lifts. Steel reacts faster than thought. For a fraction of a second, the Panther leaves its intended relationship with the earth. The turret pitches upward. The hull angles as if pulled by an invisible hand. Physics does not fail. It simply asserts itself without negotiation. Outside, the sight is almost comical, a machine designed to anchor an advance behaving like something tossed. Inside, the experience is intimate and violent. Bodies rise against straps. Boots lose contact with the floor plates. Loose equipment slams and rattles, not with the sound of combat, but with the harsh language of mechanics pushed beyond expectation. The gunner's sight blurs. The driver feels weight disappear, then return with interest. The landing is brutal. Metal shrieks as road wheels absorb forces they were never meant to meet this way. Somewhere beneath the hull, stress concentrates, unseen and irreversible. Whether the tank has thrown a track, cracked a component, or merely stunned itself is not yet clear. What is clear is that the advance has been interrupted. Shock settles in, not because the crew has been fired upon, but because of what caused it. The Panther's defining advantage, its mass, has betrayed it. The very weight that promised dominance has converted a minor misjudgment into a violent event. As the engine idles and the crew waits for the machine's response, another realization begins to form. This tank is feared not just for what it can endure, but for what others believe it represents. And that belief, too, has a history. The Panther did not arrive on the battlefield as just another tank. It arrived as an idea, an answer to earlier shocks, a correction written in steel. Its long 75mm gun promised dominance at distance. Its sharply sloped armor suggested that geometry itself had been recruited into German service. On paper, it represented learning, the belief that previous mistakes had been studied, refined, and overcome. German armored doctrine wrapped itself tightly around that belief. Counterattacks were meant to be fast and decisive, delivered not as attrition, but as shock. Armored formations striking thin points, restoring balance through momentum. The Panther fit this vision perfectly. It looked like a machine designed to survive long enough to shape the fight, not merely endure it. Commanders imagined it breaking enemy thrusts like a clenched fist. Fear followed quickly. Allied crews learned to recognize the silhouette even before they learned its weaknesses. Reports spoke of Panthers knocking out opponents from ranges that felt unfair. Rumor amplified reality. A reputation formed that traveled faster than spare parts or repair crews ever could. By the time the Panther appeared in numbers, it was already larger in the mind than on the production line. Inside the German units, trust settled unevenly. Crews believed in the gun and the armor because those elements were visible and immediate. What lay beneath, the transmission, the final drives, the stressed suspension, was abstract until it failed. Manuals spoke of tolerances and maintenance cycles, but combat rewarded what could be seen and felt: thickness, slope, reach. The Panther inspired confidence precisely where it was strongest and obscured where it was most fragile. On engineering diagrams, the tank was modern precision. In the field, it was heat trapped under armor, metal fatigued by weight, components operating near their limits. Mud clogged, seals strained, and tolerances vanished under the strain of constant movement. Reliability did not collapse all at once. It eroded quietly, one vibration at a time. Yet entire battalion movements depended on Panthers behaving as expected, advancing on schedule, holding ground, reacting predictably. Plans assumed consistency from machines built at the edge of possibility. War, however, rarely rewards assumptions. It introduces friction where innovation expects clarity. The Panther was feared because it represented progress. But progress carries a cost. Every new capability opens a new category of failure, and the battlefield, patient and unsentimental, is always waiting to discover it. The route is chosen with care, not impulse. A sunken lane curves along the edge of a small wood, shielded from distant observation and broken enough to confuse aerial eyes. What remains of a farm track offers cover where an open road would invite attention. For armored units under constant threat from aircraft, concealment is not a luxury, it is survival measured in minutes. No road in 1944 is neutral ground. Engineers have cleared what they could, when they could, but the maps lag behind the war that rewrites them daily. Bombs have cratered surfaces and then been filled by rain. Mines have been lifted, shifted, or forgotten. Months of traffic, tracked and wheeled, have churned the earth into something that looks solid, but behaves unpredictably. The ground remembers every impact, even when it no longer shows them. From the commander's cupola, the lane appears familiar. Experience teaches him what danger usually looks like. The sharp cut of an anti-tank ditch, the unnatural curve of a camouflaged trench, the raw wound of a fresh crater. These threats announce themselves to trained eyes. They have edges, shadows, geometry. He scans for those signs and finds none. What he cannot see is what the ground has swallowed. A culvert collapsed under repeated strain. An embankment weakened by water and vibration. Rubble pushed aside months earlier and now hidden beneath mud churned smooth by traffic. These are the deadliest obstacles, not because they are clever, but because they appear ordinary. They do not challenge attention. They wait. The Panther maintains speed, not out of recklessness, but necessity. To slow is to linger. To linger is to be found, by reconnaissance aircraft, by artillery observers, by a war that punishes hesitation. The engine's rhythm stays constant. The crew remains focused outward, watching tree lines and hedges rather than the surface beneath them. A second before impact, nothing suggests danger. The track looks firm. The lane holds its shape. The tank is exactly where it is meant to be, moving exactly as planned. This is how most failures in war announce themselves, not with warning, but with normality. Then steel meets what cannot be seen. The ground gives way where it should not. Momentum meets absence. In that instant, planning ends and physics takes over, indifferent to intent or experience. The road that promised safety reveals its true nature, not as an ally, but as an unacknowledged weapon, waiting patiently beneath mud and shadow. Heavy armor does more than protect metal and men. It shapes the way they think. Inside a machine like the Panther, confidence is not abstract. It is felt in thickness, slope, and mass. The tank does not sneak. It advances. Momentum becomes a habit, and small dangers are treated as inconveniences rather than threats. Over time, this posture settles into doctrine as much as psychology. Crews are trained to trust what engineers have given them. Armor is angled to deflect, not merely resist. Penetration tables and combat reports reinforce the lesson. At range, the Panther survives. That belief is not naive. It is earned through experience. When rounds strike and fail, when lighter vehicles burn nearby, trust hardens into certainty. Survival feels designed, calculated, intentional. Commanders absorb that certainty and build plans around it. Panthers are assigned the hardest routes, the most exposed approaches, the counterattacks where resistance is expected to be thickest. They are treated as problem solvers, machines that can be committed where others would hesitate. Weight becomes a substitute for caution, a way to push through uncertainty rather than navigate around it. But the battlefield does not reserve its punishments for enemy fire. Terrain is an equal participant, indifferent to armor thickness or doctrine. Roads soften, shoulders collapse. Ground that supports 30 tons does not always tolerate 50. Mud does not respect sloped armor, and gravity is unimpressed by reputation. These forces work slowly, quietly, and without warning. In this environment, mass becomes a double-edged truth. When stable, it delivers dominance, traction, shock, and authority. When stability falters, that same mass commits fully to error. There is no light correction for a heavy vehicle. Momentum amplifies misjudgment. What might be a jolt for a lighter tank becomes a structural event for a Panther. Weight does not forgive. This is the deeper arrogance of mechanized warfare, the belief that engineering can replace attentiveness. Machines are trusted to absorb risk, so humans do not have to. Over time, vigilance narrows. Crews watch for guns more than ground. Commanders calculate enemy strength more carefully than surface integrity. The machine becomes the solution rather than part of the problem. None of this is stupidity. It is logic carried too far. The Panther was designed for decisive movement, and decisive movement demands confidence. Yet confidence, once institutionalized, resists adjustment. Warnings from maintenance crews compete with operational pressure. Caution loses arguments to urgency. The weight that once promised safety begins to dictate behavior. The tragedy is subtle. No order instructs a crew to ignore terrain. No doctrine dismisses the ground outright. Instead, assumptions accumulate quietly. That a road will behave like a road, that concealment implies safety, that speed compensates for uncertainty. These assumptions do not fail individually. They align, briefly, disastrously. By the time the Panther reaches the route that looks reliable, the philosophy is already in place. The tank is expected to endure. The ground is expected to cooperate. And when expectation replaces verification, miscalculation becomes only a matter of distance. Ahead lies nothing dramatic, just earth shaped by time, water, and war. It does not look like an enemy, but it is waiting to test whether weight can truly substitute for caution. By 1944, Allied forces had learned a lesson that no gun barrel alone could teach. Tanks do not need to be destroyed to be defeated. They only need to be stopped. Engineers and defenders across the Western Front began to think less about penetration and more about interruption. If armor could be slowed, fixed in place, or redirected, firepower would follow naturally. Obstacles became deliberate instruments of war. Minefields were laid not just to explode, but to channel movement. Ditches were cut at angles that defeated tracks rather than hulls. Anti-tank stakes and dragon's teeth were positioned to break momentum, not necessarily to hold ground. Improvised roadblocks, logs, rubble, wrecked vehicles were placed where detours would be costly or impossible. Each feature reshaped how armored units moved, narrowing choice until predictability emerged. Bomb craters joined this arsenal by accident and design. What aircraft created for destruction became traps through repetition. Rain filled them. Mud softened their edges. Tanks that entered often could not climb out under their own power. Flooded fields turned into adhesive surfaces, gripping tracks and stealing torque. Hedgerows, once agricultural boundaries, became armored walls when reinforced by earth and root. The battlefield thickened, not with enemy troops, but with resistance built into the land itself. Even natural features proved capable of defeating heavy armor. Shallow streambeds concealed under foliage could collapse under weight. Soft road shoulders, safe for trucks, gave way beneath tracked vehicles. Culverts, never intended to carry 50 tons repeatedly, cracked and sank. None of these were dramatic. None announced themselves as weapons. They simply waited for mass to test them. For a Panther, immobilization often meant defeat. A tank that could not move, could not maneuver its armor, could not choose engagement range, and could not disengage. It became a responsibility rather than an asset. Recovery required time, equipment and protection, resources that were increasingly scarce. A stuck Panther drew attention, fire and opportunity in equal measure. Crews understood this, at least in theory. Training manuals warned of terrain. After-action reports described recoveries under fire and losses without penetration. Yet understanding competed with pressure. Orders demanded speed. Air superiority punished delay. The safest choice tactically often felt like the most dangerous operationally. To hesitate was to invite other forms of destruction, so crews gambled. They trusted surfaces that looked firm. They crossed features that seemed marginal but passable. Each decision was rational in isolation, made under incomplete information and constant threat. Most of the time, the gamble paid off. That success reinforced the habit, narrowing the margin further. In this story, the enemy is not a gunner waiting in concealment. It is the battlefield itself, shaped by months of fighting, weather, and improvisation. The hidden obstacle does not think, aim, or react. It simply exists, indifferent to doctrine and intention. When mass meets uncertainty, it does not need intelligence to win. The Panther's strength was built to dominate open battle. But the Western Front was no longer open. It was layered, obstructed, and hostile to momentum. Somewhere ahead, the ground would offer a test not of firepower, but of judgment, and it would not give warning before demanding an answer. The decision is made without ceremony, the way most decisive errors are made in war. The commander sees a line that will save minutes, an inner curve along the lane, a shortcut across a track that looks firm enough, a choice that keeps the column moving and reduces the time spent exposed. It is not bravado. It is arithmetic under pressure. By late 1944, delay is no longer neutral. To slow on a route is to invite the sky. Allied aircraft do not need to destroy an armored column to ruin it. They only need to see it. Artillery, too, feeds on hesitation. A vehicle that lingers gives observers time to mark coordinates, to adjust, to turn a guessed position into a registered one. Ambushes mature in the same way. An anti-tank team that hears engines but cannot place them is still searching. Give them minutes, and they become certain. Movement then becomes its own defense. So the commander chooses speed, not reckless speed, but the tempo that doctrine and circumstance demand. The Panther's engine responds faithfully. The driver holds the tank steady. The crew's attention is directed outward, toward the threats that kill without warning. Tree lines, hedgerows, bends in the lane where a gun might be waiting. In combat, eyes are trained for silhouettes, flashes, unnatural shapes. They are not trained to see absence. That is the hidden obstacle's advantage. It does not look like danger. It looks like nothing at all. A patch of mud that seems consistent with the rest. A shallow dip that the eye accepts as ordinary. A surface smoothed by rain and traffic. The crew scans for enemies, not voids. In their world, threats usually arrive with intent. The ground has no intent, and therefore receives less suspicion. A heavy tank requires margin. Weight demands space for correction, time for braking, room to choose lines that distribute stress rather than concentrate it. But margin is expensive. Margin costs minutes, and minutes cost survival. Under pressure, the crew spends that margin on tempo. The Panther keeps its pace because slowing would be an admission that they are being hunted, and they already know they are. The miscalculation is small enough to feel harmless. A few meters off the safest line, drifting toward what seems like a firmer surface. A few kilometers per hour more than ideal, chosen not for thrill, but for schedule. These are not dramatic choices. They are the kind made thousands of times across the front, most of them forgotten because they end normally. But mass is unforgiving. When a light vehicle is wrong, it jolts and recovers. When a 50-ton vehicle is wrong, it commits. Momentum becomes a lever. Weight becomes a multiplier. A minor error becomes a mechanical event, not because anyone intended it, but because physics translates small mistakes into large consequences when the object is large enough. The Panther moves into the wrong patch of earth, and the ground does what it has been prepared, by bombs, water, and war, to do. It fails beneath the point of maximum load. The track bites where it expects support and finds a hidden edge instead. In the instant before impact, there is still the illusion of control. And then the illusion ends, because the battlefield does not punish arrogance with speeches. It punishes it with geometry. The Panther strikes the obstacle with no warning, no gradual resistance, no chance for correction. The leading edge of the track meets the hard lip of something concealed. A culvert rim collapsed inward, the upper edge of a trench softened by rain, or the buried boundary of a bomb crater disguised by mud. The contact is brief, decisive, and absolute. Momentum has already committed the machine to the outcome. The front of the hull rises, not slowly, not dramatically, simply enough to be wrong. The track loses purchase where it expects resistance. Suspension arms compress asymmetrically, storing force they were never designed to return in this direction. Then they rebound. The Panther behaves for an instant like a spring tuned for another battlefield. Physics does not negotiate with intention. It responds only to mass and speed. From the outside, the sight is startling in its contradiction. A 50-ton tank lifts as if lightened, the turret pitching upward, the hull angling away from the earth that was meant to anchor it. It is not flight, but it is absence, an interruption in contact that no armored doctrine accounts for. The machine looks briefly unmoored, stripped of its authority by the simple fact of leaving the ground. Inside, the experience is immediate and disorienting. The crew feels weight vanish before they understand why. Bodies rise against straps. Boots lose pressure on steel floor plates. The sound is not gunfire, but something closer and more personal. Metal shrieking under torsion, stowage tearing loose, ammunition racks rattling with a violence that suggests impact before it arrives. Optics judder in their mounts. Alignment, so carefully maintained, begins to drift. The driver has no corrective input left to give. Controls respond too late to matter. The tank is no longer being driven. It is being carried forward by its own inertia. In this enclosed space, the crew hears the geometry of failure unfolding, angles shifting, tolerances exceeded, components meeting forces they were never tested against in isolation. The landing is not a single event, but a sequence of punishments. If the Panther comes down nose first, the forward suspension absorbs a concentrated blow, transferring stress along the hull into the drivetrain. If it lands unevenly or sideways, road wheels take loads they were not designed to share. Track links may be forced out of alignment. Pins strain. Steel deforms invisibly, in ways that will only reveal themselves when the engine is asked to deliver power again. There is a moment after impact when everything goes quiet. Not because the danger has passed, but because the machine is processing what has happened. The engine note changes subtly. Vibrations feel unfamiliar. The driver tests the pedals with care, waiting for feedback that will tell him whether the tank is still whole in the ways that matter. Mobility is no longer assumed. It must be proven. Firepower is suddenly in question as well. If the turret ring has flexed, traverse may be uneven or jammed. If the gun has shifted in its mount, accuracy becomes uncertain. A Panther that cannot rely on its gun at range loses the very advantage that defined it. At the precise moment when threat is highest, when the column has stalled, when attention is drawn, the tank may no longer be fully itself. Outside, the battalion sees the event unfold and understands it immediately. Armor is supposed to move. Movement is safety. Movement keeps spacing, preserves tempo, denies the enemy fixed points. When one tank behaves unexpectedly, when it lifts, lands hard and hesitates, the interruption ripples outward. Drivers slow, commanders look back, spacing compresses. What was fluid becomes hesitant in seconds. Interruption invites death because it creates certainty. A stopped tank can be marked. A paused column can be ranged. An unexpected delay turns a concealed route into a predictable one. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, eyes are watching, noting the pause, the smoke, the unusual stillness where motion should be. Opportunity does not need explanation. It only needs time. Inside the Panther, the crew waits for confirmation from the machine. Gauges are checked, controls are tested gently, then with more insistence. Can it move forward? Can it reverse? Does the transmission answer cleanly or with protest? These are technical questions, but they are asked under tactical pressure. Each second spent diagnosing is a second spent existing as a target. This is where struggle truly begins, not with enemy fire, but with uncertainty. A mobile tank can choose. A stationary one must endure. The crew understands the stakes without discussion. If the Panther can move, even imperfectly, it may yet escape the attention now forming around it. If it cannot, everything changes. The airborne moment has already done its damage. Even if no component has failed outright, the battalion's momentum has been broken. The illusion of invulnerability, built from weight, slope and reputation, has cracked. What remains is a machine subject to the same rules as every other. It must move, or it will be dealt with. As the driver applies power and waits for the tank's response, another question hangs unanswered, one that will shape everything that follows. Has the Panther survived the impact as a fighting vehicle, or has it crossed an invisible line, becoming something else entirely? A heavy object fixed in place, waiting for the battlefield to finish what the ground began. The order comes quickly and without debate. Smoke, then security. Recovery is not treated as maintenance, because maintenance implies time, and time no longer belongs to them. White smoke blooms along the lane, spreading outward to break sightlines and confuse observers who may already be watching. Infantry fan out, weapons raised, not to advance, but to hold space around a single wounded machine. Crewmen climb out of the Panther with practiced urgency. They do not run. Running draws attention. They move instead with the deliberate speed of men who know they are exposed. Tools are dragged from storage racks. Tow cables are uncoiled, their weight familiar, their purpose suddenly urgent. Beside them, the tank looms like a fallen structure, intact in silhouette, uncertain in function. If the track has been thrown, the work is brutally physical. Links must be aligned by hand, each one resisting cooperation. Mud fills gaps where precision once mattered. Hammers strike steel with dull, exhausting rhythm. Tension must be restored evenly, because uneven tension will simply throw the track again, perhaps under power, perhaps at the worst possible moment. Every movement is a compromise between speed and correctness. This is labor done in the open. No armor protects the men now, only the hope that smoke holds, that enemy eyes are slow, that artillery has not yet been called. Sweat mixes with grime. Gloves slip, fingers ache. The Panther's mass, once a comfort, now dictates the terms of the repair. Nothing about it is light. Nothing about it is forgiving. Recovery vehicles are not guaranteed. Towing a Panther requires another heavy tank or a specialized tractor, both of which may be kilometers away or already committed elsewhere. Even if one is available, attaching cables under threat is a separate ordeal. A Panther resists being moved when it does not wish to move. Brakes, damaged components, or distorted alignment can turn towing into a slow, grinding process measured in meters gained per minute lost. Each minute matters. Smoke thins. Wind shifts. Somewhere beyond the trees, an observer may already be estimating range, waiting for confirmation before passing coordinates. Aircraft do not need precision. They only need something that stays in place long enough to justify attention. A stationary tank is a signal flare written in steel. Inside the Panther, a quieter drama unfolds. The driver remains at his station, hands resting lightly on controls, listening. He brings the engine up slightly, then eases it back. He tests response not for power, but for tone, for the subtle cues that suggest whether gears are meshing cleanly or protesting under strain. It is a kind of diagnosis, performed by ear and instinct. A transmission that answers reluctantly may still move the tank. One that screams will destroy itself if pressed. The commander weighs options with shrinking margins. Protect the repair and commit infantry and armor to a static defense. Abandon the tank and preserve the unit's mobility. Or destroy it, disable the gun, set charges, deny the enemy a prize. None of these choices are clean. All of them cost something irreplaceable: time, equipment, morale, or doctrine. Protection ties the unit to a fixed point, inviting exactly the attention they fear. Abandonment leaves behind a symbol, proof that even heavy armor can be made helpless. Destruction is final, an admission that recovery has failed. The decision must be made before the battlefield makes it for them. The men working the track feel this pressure without needing it explained. Every strike of the hammer carries urgency beyond the mechanical task. They work knowing that success may still come too late, that mobility restored under fire is not the same as mobility preserved. Their world has narrowed to steel links, tension screws, and the sound of distant engines that may or may not belong to friendly forces. This struggle strips the Panther of its mystique. Here, it is not a feared weapon or a doctrinal solution. It is a problem, complex, heavy, demanding attention it cannot repay. The machine's sophistication offers no advantage while it sits still. Firepower means nothing if it cannot be brought to bear where needed. Armor protects only if it can be oriented and moved. The truth becomes unavoidable. Movement is life for armored warfare. Without it, even the most advanced tank becomes a liability, consuming resources and attention while offering little in return. Recovery under threat exposes this reality with clarity. There is no heroism in a stuck machine, only effort and risk. As the crew waits for the final test, engine engaged, track tensioned, tow cable attached or removed, the question tightens. Will the Panther rejoin the flow of the battle, or has it already crossed into a different category altogether? The smoke begins to thin, and with it, the time left to decide. The pause is subtle, but it is unmistakable to those trained to see it. Armor is meant to move, steadily, rhythmically, with intent. When it stops where no objective exists, it announces itself. Allied observers, whether concealed along the ground or circling far above, notice the anomaly almost at once. A vehicle that should be advancing is no longer doing so. Perfect identification is unnecessary. Artillery does not require certainty, only probability. Coordinates are estimated, grids marked, corrections prepared. The guns begin to bracket the area, not in haste but with patience. A shell falls short, another long. The space between them tightens. The goal is not immediate destruction, but definition, turning an uncertain location into a known one. On the ground, the pause draws attention like scent. Infantry patrols adjust their routes, drawn toward the silence where engines should be. Anti-tank teams move with purpose, carrying weapons designed for moments exactly like this. A moving tank is dangerous. A stationary one is manageable. Time transforms fear into calculation. The German battalion feels the effects almost immediately. Tempo fractures. Vehicles behind the Panther slow or halt, unsure whether the route is still viable. Others detour onto secondary tracks, compressing spacing and creating congestion where dispersion once offered safety. Command becomes reactive. Orders shift from advance to adjustment, from momentum to mitigation. This is how disorder begins, not with panic, but with inconsistency. Some crews wait, others move without coordination. The rhythm that protected the unit dissolves into individual decisions, each rational on its own, collectively hazardous. The battlefield rewards coherence, and it punishes its absence without hesitation. Beside the immobilized Panther, the crew experiences a different kind of pressure. The fear is not of impact, but of exposure. Shells have not yet landed, but anticipation weighs heavier than steel. Every second feels counted by someone else. The men become acutely aware of sound, the distant thump of guns, the change in air, the unnatural quiet between engines. Waiting becomes its own form of threat. The ground around the tank begins to feel smaller, as if the world has narrowed to a circle of attention. Smoke dissipates. Shadows shift. What was once concealment becomes transparency. The crew understands that they are no longer just part of a moving formation. They are a reference point, a location, something to be addressed. This is the hidden obstacle's true achievement. It has not destroyed the Panther. It has not even necessarily disabled it beyond recovery. Instead, it has created a fixed point, an anchor around which enemy action can organize. The battlefield prefers targets that do not change position. It builds plans around stillness. Innovation meets reality here, without ceremony. Superior armor, long guns, and sloped plates offer no answer to the simple act of being forced to stop. The Panther's reputation matters little when it cannot deny the enemy time. Time allows observation. Observation allows coordination. Coordination allows fire. Artillery fire begins to creep closer. Infantry probes test the perimeter, not to break it, but to define it. Each movement tightens the noose without needing to rush. The Allies do not need heroics. They need patience. The pause has given them both opportunity and clarity. Within the German unit, confidence erodes quietly. Crews begin to think not about objectives, but about extraction. Routes that were meant for advance are now evaluated for retreat. Radios carry clipped exchanges, heavy with implication. The battalion's energy shifts from projection to preservation, and that shift is felt even before it is spoken. The Panther remains central to this change. Whether it is recovered or lost matters less in this moment than the fact that it stopped. One interruption has altered the behavior of many vehicles. One hidden obstacle has reshaped an entire formation's decision-making. This is how terrain exerts power, indirectly, efficiently, without spectacle. The enemy understands this instinctively. They do not rush the tank. They let pressure accumulate. They let options close. A stationary target simplifies war. It turns complexity into sequence, movement into stages. The Panther, once a symbol of momentum, has become a lesson in its fragility. As artillery tightens its pattern and infantry edges closer, the question is no longer whether the pause has been noticed. It is how much time remains before the pause is exploited fully. The battalion can feel the clock slipping, not marked in minutes, but in the narrowing of choices. Somewhere along the line, a realization settles in. The greatest vulnerability of armored warfare is not penetration, but interruption. Force the machine to stop, and superiority begins to dissolve on its own. The battlefield does not need to outfight innovation. It only needs to outweight it. And as the pause stretches on, one truth becomes unavoidable. The moment the Panther left the ground, it also left the protection of momentum. Everything that follows is the enemy reading that fact and responding with patience. The counterattack does not collapse all at once. It unravels. The battalion's schedule, carefully calculated, tightly sequenced, begins to slip around the immobilized Panther like water around a stone. Vehicles bunch where spacing was meant to protect them. Others idle, engines running, burning fuel while waiting for clarity that does not arrive. Command radios fill with updates that describe position, not progress. This kind of operation depends on synchronized movement. Armor is meant to arrive together, to apply pressure across a narrow window before the enemy can react. Each platoon's timing is linked to the next, each route chosen to avoid overlap and congestion. When one element stops unexpectedly, the geometry of the plan distorts. Improvisation replaces execution, and improvisation carries uncertainty. Drivers choose alternate lanes that were never meant for heavy traffic. Narrow tracks absorb more weight than they were designed to bear. Turns tighten. Columns stretch and compress unevenly. What was meant to be a single thrust fractures into fragments moving at different speeds with different levels of exposure. Control becomes suggestion rather than command. The enemy notices. Predictability returns to the battlefield, and predictability is lethal. Allied fire increases not because of aggression, but because routes have become legible. Vehicles funnel into known lanes, avoiding blocked areas and converging on the same usable ground. Artillery observers adjust calmly. There is no need to rush when movement has already been constrained. German leaders begin to understand what has happened, not in dramatic terms but operational ones. The counterattack is no longer early enough to surprise. It is no longer fast enough to overwhelm. The delay, measured at first in minutes, has grown into something more dangerous. Anticipation. The enemy is no longer reacting. They are preparing. At some point during this unraveling, the fate of the Panther is decided. It is either recovered, dragged back into motion at cost to engines and men, or it is abandoned, perhaps destroyed in place to deny capture. On paper, both outcomes resolve the immediate problem. In reality, both extract a price that cannot be reimbursed. Recovery consumes fuel and attention. It ties other vehicles to the task, pulling strength away from the advance. Abandonment removes a powerful asset permanently and marks the route with evidence of failure. Either way, the battalion loses something intangible but critical: confidence in the plan's inevitability. This is the quiet turning point. There is no single explosion, no shouted order that marks the shift. Instead, thinking changes. Leaders stop asking how to achieve the objective and start asking what can be preserved. Assets are counted, routes are reassessed with retreat in mind. The language on the radio shifts subtly, from projection to protection. Momentum, the invisible engine of mechanized warfare, has been interrupted long enough to cool. Restarting it is not simply a matter of pressing forward again. Momentum depends on belief. Belief that speed will protect, that coordination will hold, that resistance will arrive too late to matter. Once doubt enters, speed slows naturally. Caution expands. The Panther's airborne moment now reveals its wider consequence. It was not just a mechanical failure or a recovery problem. It was a temporal rupture. The battalion has lost its clock. Without timing, mass loses coherence. Armor without synchronization becomes heavy traffic, not a weapon. Allied forces exploit this patiently. Fire is applied where congestion appears. Pressure is increased where reroutes compress movement. The battlefield shapes behavior with quiet efficiency. German vehicles continue to move, but no longer with the same purpose. Each one now carries the burden of uncertainty created by a single delay. Fuel is burned inefficiently. Engines idle too long. Crews wait for orders that change before they are executed. None of this feels like defeat in the moment. It feels like friction. But friction accumulates, and in war, accumulation is decisive. The battalion's leaders recognize the truth even if they cannot correct it. The counterattack has crossed a threshold. It can still fight, still inflict damage, still withdraw in order, but it can no longer impose its will according to plan. Initiative has slipped away, not seized by the enemy in a single act, but surrendered minute by minute. This is the moral hinge of the story. Mechanized warfare is not only about armor thickness or gun caliber. It is about movement through time as much as space. Whoever controls tempo controls outcomes. And tempo, once lost, is difficult to recover under pressure. The hidden obstacle did not destroy the Panther outright. It did something more subtle and more powerful. It stole time. Inches of compromised ground translated into hours of disruption. A momentary loss of contact with the earth became a lasting loss of initiative. As the battalion reorganizes, slower, more cautiously, with eyes now fixed on extraction routes as much as objectives, the lesson settles in without announcement. Momentum is fragile. It depends on uninterrupted motion, coordinated belief, and ground that behaves as expected. On this battlefield, the ground refused, and in refusing, it reshaped an entire operation. The counterattack continues in name, but its clock is gone. What follows will not be decided by speed, but by endurance, and by how much pressure a stalled force can withstand once the enemy knows exactly where time was lost. If the Panther remains stuck, the battlefield adjusts its focus. Artillery and anti-tank weapons begin to converge, not urgently, but deliberately. A stationary Panther is no longer an enigma. It is finally manageable. Coordinates are refined, ranges are confirmed. What once required maneuver now requires patience. The tank still looks formidable. Its silhouette remains imposing, its gun capable, its armor thick. But stillness changes everything. Without movement, armor cannot angle itself optimally. Without speed, the Panther cannot choose distance. The very attributes that made it feared now demand conditions that no longer exist. Inside, the crew attempts to fight while impaired. Traverse is limited, either by mechanical strain or the geometry of the ground beneath them. Optics, shaken by impact, offer a narrower, less reliable picture of the world. The gun can still fire, but its authority has been reduced. Every engagement feels reactive rather than commanding. Around the tank, German infantry forms a perimeter. Rifles and machine guns are positioned not to advance, but to shield. They understand the tank's value extends beyond firepower. As long as it remains operational, it anchors morale. As long as it fires, it suggests resistance. Losing it would mean more than losing steel. It would mean losing a symbol. Smoke drifts through the trees, carried unevenly by the wind. It conceals, then reveals. Commands are shouted and repeated, not because they are unclear, but because noise and tension erase certainty. Wounded men are dragged backward along the same track that betrayed the tank, pulled through mud and shadow toward whatever safety still exists behind the line. Allied fire begins to tighten. Shells arrive closer now, not random but purposeful. Anti-tank teams edge forward under cover, knowing the Panther cannot reposition quickly enough to dominate them all. Each movement is cautious, but confident. The enemy has learned the limits of the giant before them. The Panther absorbs punishment as it was designed to do. Fragments ring against armor. Near misses shake the hull. But survivability is not victory. The tank's options narrow with each minute. Ammunition is finite. Visibility is compromised. Mechanical stress accumulates silently, waiting to reveal itself at the worst possible moment. A single hit can change everything. A round striking the engine deck may not penetrate fully, but it can cripple cooling or fuel delivery. A shot to the track does not need to explode, it only needs to break alignment. A glancing blow near the turret ring can jam traverse, turning a weapon into a fixed gun with blind spots the enemy can exploit. The crew knows this. Every impact is evaluated not just for damage, but for implication. Can they still move? Can they still fight? Can they still withdraw if ordered? These questions remain unanswered longer than comfort allows. Uncertainty becomes constant. The climax is not dramatic in the way war films often suggest. There is no charge, no final stand framed by heroics. It is mechanical and procedural. The slow loss of options. A checklist reduced one item at a time. Mobility uncertain. Firepower constrained. Support stretched thin. Nearby infantry begins to feel the strain as well. Ammunition runs low. Casualties mount. Holding a static perimeter invites enfilade fire and artillery concentration. What began as protection becomes exposure. The presence of the Panther, once reassuring, now dictates where danger will fall. The battalion senses the wider truth even if no one says it aloud. A heavy tank can become a heavy liability. Its size attracts attention. Its importance demands defense. Its immobility reshapes the fight around itself, pulling men and resources into a shrinking circle. Orders arrive clipped and incomplete. Withdraw if possible. Hold if necessary. Do not lose the tank unless unavoidable. Each directive conflicts slightly with the others. Commanders must interpret rather than execute. That is rarely a sign of advantage. The Panther fires again, a reminder of what it still represents. The report echoes through the trees, sharp and authoritative. For a moment it feels as though the machine has reasserted itself. But the moment passes. The battlefield does not respond with hesitation. Fire resumes, more focused than before. Smoke thickens, then thins. Dust settles on hot metal. The tank's engine idles, or strains, or falls silent briefly before returning. Each sound carries meaning. Each pause invites interpretation. The crew listens more than they speak now. This is the point at which outcomes crystallize. Either recovery will succeed under pressure, or the Panther will be lost, not necessarily destroyed in a single strike, but rendered irrelevant by accumulated damage and exposure. The difference between those outcomes is measured in minutes, and minutes are running out. The battalion feels the weight of this moment beyond the immediate fight. They understand that what is happening here reflects something larger, not a failure of courage, but of circumstance, not an ambush, but an accumulation of limits. The climax resolves not with a decisive explosion, but with acceptance. Acceptance that even the most advanced machine cannot escape the rules that govern the battlefield. Acceptance that mass, once celebrated, now constrains. Acceptance that superiority depends on motion, and that motion, once denied, cannot be willed back into existence. As fire continues to concentrate and options continue to close, the Panther stands where it stopped, no longer airborne, no longer advancing, simply present. A giant reduced to a fixed point, and around that point, the war tightens, patient and methodical, waiting for mechanics, not bravery, to decide the end. The immobilized Panther becomes more than a problem. It becomes a point of gravity. Vehicles approaching from behind slow, then stop, drawn into the narrowing space where movement was never meant to pause. Dispersion collapses. What had been a flowing formation tightens into a cluster, each vehicle closer to the next than doctrine ever intended. Armor meant to survive by spacing now survives by chance. This congestion does not go unnoticed. Allied artillery shifts focus with calm efficiency. The clustered vehicles offer a density that removes guesswork. Fire falls not to destroy everything at once, but to disrupt and confuse. Explosions land close enough to force hesitation, close enough to make movement feel dangerous in every direction. Panic does not arrive as flight. It arrives as disorder. Drivers edge forward, then brake. Others reverse abruptly, seeking distance that no longer exists. Orders overlap. One vehicle waits for clearance that will never come. Another moves without instruction, creating a new obstacle in the attempt to escape the first. The battalion begins to consume its own space. Commanders attempt reroutes, knowing the danger of remaining fixed. But reroutes demand reconnaissance, and reconnaissance demands time, both of which have already been spent. Secondary tracks are unverified, narrow or compromised by earlier movement. Sending vehicles down them risks new immobilizations, new choke points. Every alternative carries uncertainty, and uncertainty now feels intolerable. Vehicles turn around where they were never meant to turn. On narrow farm tracks and wooded lanes, space runs out quickly. Tanks swing wide, blocking supply trucks. Recovery vehicles collide with retreating armor. Fuel carriers halt behind disabled vehicles, unable to pass, unable to reverse. The battalion's own logistics become barriers, sealing exits even as pressure increases. This is how cohesion fractures, not with a single order to withdraw, but with many simultaneous attempts to do so. Units peel away in small groups, each seeking safety independently. Radios crackle with fragmented messages that describe motion without coordination. The battalion ceases to act as one force and begins to behave like many isolated ones. The battlefield exploits this fragmentation relentlessly. Artillery patterns follow movement. Areas of congestion are punished repeatedly, not to annihilate, but to keep them unusable. Infantry probes identify escape routes and close them with fire. The enemy does not need to surround the battalion completely. They only need to shape where it cannot go. In this chaos, the memory of the Panther's airborne moment takes on new meaning. What began as a mechanical accident now feels symbolic. That instant when steel left the ground becomes the moment confidence departed as well. The tank did not just lose traction, it carried belief with it, lifting it briefly before letting it fall hard. Crews remember that moment not as spectacle, but as a sensation. The sudden realization that assumptions could fail. That weight was not immunity. That momentum could vanish. Those realizations spread faster than orders, seeping into decision-making under pressure. Once doubt enters, every choice feels provisional. German commanders try to restore order, but authority weakens when outcomes feel uncontrollable. Commands to hold clash with instincts to move. Instructions to regroup compete with the visible danger of staying where artillery is already adjusting. Leadership does not disappear, but it is forced to operate in a landscape where compliance feels unsafe. The rout does not resemble collapse in the traditional sense. There is no mass surrender, no wild flight across open ground. Instead, there is breakdown. Vehicles escape piecemeal. Infantry detach from armor. Support elements are left without protection or direction. The battalion still exists on paper, but on the ground it has dissolved into reactions. The original misstep now reveals its full cost. One tank stopped, and with it, timing. Timing lost, and with it, spacing. Spacing lost, and with it, resilience. Each consequence follows logically, almost mechanically, as if the battlefield itself is executing a sequence. The hidden obstacle has done its work thoroughly. It has not destroyed the battalion directly. It has forced it to turn inward, to collide with its own limits. Terrain, pressure, and time have combined to produce what weapons alone might not have achieved so efficiently. As groups withdraw under fire, the sense of initiative is gone. Movement now serves escape rather than purpose. Routes are chosen for immediacy, not advantage. The battalion is no longer shaping events. It is responding to them, one localized crisis at a time. This is the completion of the turning point. What began as a small miscalculation, a choice measured in meters and seconds, has expanded into a chain reaction of delay, exposure, and breakdown. No single decision afterward can reverse it. Too many thresholds have been crossed. The Airborne Panther, once an anomaly, now feels inevitable in retrospect. It marks the precise instant when the unit's relationship with the battlefield changed. Before it, the ground was assumed to cooperate. After it, nothing could be trusted to behave as expected. As the battalion fragments and the pressure tightens, one lesson becomes unavoidable. In mechanized warfare, strength is collective. When that collectivity is disrupted, by terrain, by delay, by a single immobile machine, the result is not just loss, but unraveling. The rout has not been triggered by fear alone, nor by enemy brilliance. It has been triggered by interruption. One tank stopped many, and in that stoppage, the battlefield revealed how quickly order can become congestion, and how easily congestion becomes defeat once momentum is gone. When the firing slackens, the battlefield exhales without relief. Smoke thins. Engines fall silent one by one. What remains is not victory or defeat, but inventory. Crews begin the quiet work of counting. Tanks missing from the line, vehicles burned where they stopped, men unaccounted for whose absence must be explained later in reports and letters. The language used to describe the incident is technical and restrained. thrown track, broken suspension, recovery failed. These phrases move easily across paper because they are precise and because they create distance. They describe metal, not men. They allow the event to be filed, summarized, and forwarded without lingering on what happened between impact and withdrawal. Yet behind every noun is a sequence of decisions and exposures. A driver who waited for confirmation that never came. A crewman who worked a hammer too long in open ground. Infantry who held a perimeter until holding no longer made sense. The paperwork does not capture these moments, but the survivors carry them intact. The battalion's mission is adjusted quietly. Objectives are reduced or cancelled altogether, not as punishment, but as necessity. Timelines that depended on synchronized movement are rewritten. Neighboring units are asked to compensate, to cover gaps created by delay. On a larger map, the front absorbs the change. But absorption does not mean neutrality. Every adjustment pushes pressure elsewhere. For the men who were there, memory does not settle on the enemy. It settles on the ground. The dip that looked ordinary, the lip hidden by mud, the sensation of rising when nothing should have lifted. Survivors replay the moment not as chaos, but as clarity, the instant when expectation and reality separated cleanly. The Panther's reputation changes in a way that matters. It is not diminished by defeat in battle, but by demonstration. It has been shown that the tank can be made helpless without being outgunned, that its advantages require conditions that are not always present. That weight, once celebrated, can be turned against itself by terrain that offers no warning. Allied forces draw familiar conclusions. Engineers note again how obstacles shape movement more reliably than firepower alone. Observers record how pauses attract attention and how attention concentrates force. These are not new lessons, but war rewards repetition. What works once is catalogued and applied again, wherever ground and pressure allow. The incident becomes a reference point, not because it was exceptional, but because it was illustrative. It shows how modern warfare is not only a contest between weapons systems, but a negotiation with environment. Roads, fields, culverts, and shoulders are not passive features. They participate. They decide where mass may go and where it must stop. Among the survivors, confidence adjusts subtly, not collapses, adjusts. Crews approach routes differently. Commanders ask different questions. Caution does not replace courage, but it tempers certainty. The Panther remains powerful, but no longer feels absolute. Its limits are now personal, not theoretical. This is how consequence settles, not with ceremony, but with recalibration. Beliefs are refined by experience. Assumptions are narrowed. The battlefield leaves behind not only wreckage, but instruction. It teaches without explanation, indifferent to whether the lesson is welcome. The quiet accounting continues long after the area is abandoned. Maintenance units note patterns of stress. Staff officers reference the delay when explaining larger movements. Histories compress the event into a paragraph. But for those who felt the ground give way, the memory remains expansive. In the end, the story resolves without a single villain. There is no ambush to curse, no weapon to condemn. There is only terrain doing what terrain does, responding to weight, water, and time. The Panther did not fail because it was poorly built, nor because its crew lacked skill. It failed because the battlefield demanded conditions it could not guarantee. The lesson is unromantic and enduring. War is not only a duel of wills and machines. It is a negotiation with the earth beneath them. The side that forgets this pays quietly at first, then decisively. When the reports are filed and the maps updated, the ground remains unchanged. Mud dries, ruts harden, culverts sag under repeated strain. The battlefield keeps its memory, even when men move on. And somewhere along that unremarkable stretch of road, the earth retains the imprint of a moment when steel trusted it completely, and was answered with absence. In the aftermath, the Panther is not discarded, but reconsidered. Its strengths remain undeniable. The long gun still dominates at range. The sloped armor still defeats shells that would cripple lighter vehicles. In direct combat, under favorable conditions, the Panther remains a formidable opponent. But this incident forces a more complete evaluation, one that includes what happens when those conditions are absent. Maintenance emerges as the quiet counterweight to firepower. The Panther's sophistication demands constant attention, transmissions strained by weight, final drives operating near their limits, tracks enduring stresses that multiply with every maneuver. None of these weaknesses are new, but incidents like this one make them unavoidable. A tank that requires recovery resources it cannot reliably be given becomes vulnerable in ways no armor plate can solve. German doctrine had been built around armored counterstrokes, fast, concentrated thrusts meant to restore initiative through momentum. Earlier in the war, this approach thrived on surprise, fuel availability, and relative freedom of movement. By late 1944, those conditions no longer hold. Fuel shortages shorten reach. Allied air power punishes daylight movement. Roads are damaged, mined, or cratered. Terrain that once merely slowed, now actively denies. The Panther, designed for decisive movement, suffers most when movement is constrained. Its weight amplifies every misjudgment. Its complexity resists quick repair under fire. When recovery vehicles are scarce or absent, immobilization becomes final not by design, but by circumstance. The incident illustrates a systemic weakness, technological excellence outpacing logistical reality. For the crews, the struggle is dual. They fight the enemy's weapons, but they also fight their own machine's limits. A driver listens anxiously to a transmission that may not forgive another strain. A commander weighs whether a maneuver will gain advantage or simply consume mechanical margin. Track stress, heat buildup, and alignment are no longer abstract concerns. They shape every decision. This awareness produces a psychological shift. Confidence in the machine gives way to calculation. Not fear, but caution. Crews slow slightly. Routes are questioned more often. Commanders hesitate before committing Panthers to marginal ground. Each adjustment is sensible on its own, but together they affect tempo. The very caution required to preserve the tank reduces the speed doctrine depends upon. Meanwhile, Allied method grows clearer. The goal is not always to destroy armor directly, but to stop it. Force the tank to pause, channel it, fix it in place. Once movement is denied, firepower becomes secondary. Artillery, aircraft, and infantry weapons can be applied deliberately. The Panther's advantages are neutralized not by matching them, but by bypassing them. The incident demonstrates this method with precision. No exceptional weapon is required, no heroic assault, only patience, observation, and terrain prepared, intentionally or otherwise, to deny freedom of movement. What cannot move cannot dictate terms. In this light, the Panther's reputation shifts from invincibility to conditional dominance. It excels where ground is firm, routes are open, and tempo is maintained. It falters where the battlefield is layered with obstacles, where recovery is uncertain, and where air and artillery pressure compress time. The tank has not failed its designers. The environment has exceeded their assumptions. The legacy is sobering. Innovation can create extraordinary power, but it also creates new dependencies. Heavier armor demands stronger logistics. Greater complexity demands time and space to maintain. When those supports erode, the weapon's advantages invert. Strength becomes inertia. Sophistication becomes fragility. This incident does not condemn German armor as ineffective. Instead, it reveals the limits of technical solutions in a war increasingly defined by denial, of fuel, of airspace, of movement. The battlefield has evolved into an ecosystem hostile to mass and predictability. No single machine, however advanced, can out-innovate that environment indefinitely. The lesson extends beyond one tank or one army. Weapons are designed for ideal conditions, but wars are fought in compromised ones. The side that adapts method to reality, using terrain, pressure, and patience, gains leverage without matching technology piece for piece. As the Panther is repaired, replaced, or written off, its story becomes part of a broader reckoning. Firepower and armor remain essential, but they are no longer decisive alone. Movement is the currency of modern warfare, and the battlefield has learned how to deny it. What this incident reveals, finally, is not a flaw unique to the Panther, but a universal truth. The most advanced weapon can dominate only so long as the ground permits it to move. Once that permission is withdrawn, innovation gives way to inevitability, and the battlefield always decides when that moment arrives. The story returns, inevitably, to that airborne second. Steel rising where it was meant to press downward. A moment so brief it barely registers on the clock, yet expansive enough to reshape an entire operation. The Panther did not defy gravity through power or speed. It did so through mistake, through a small misalignment between expectation and reality. The battalion's belief in weight as safety deserves neither ridicule nor romance. It was not foolish, it was logical, shaped by experience and reinforced by design. Heavy armor had saved lives. Mass had crushed obstacles before. Trust in the machine was not blind, it was learned. But it was incomplete. It accounted for enemies, not for every condition underfoot. That incompleteness is where the hidden obstacle acquires its deeper meaning. It was not simply a culvert edge or a softened trench lip. It was a limit, unseen, unacknowledged, and unavoidable once reached. No order could remove it. No doctrine could bypass it. It waited quietly beneath mud and shadow, indifferent to intent. In this way, the obstacle becomes a metaphor for late-war Germany itself. The belief in technological solutions, in weight and complexity, collided with constraints that could not be engineered away. Fuel shortages, air superiority lost, roads degraded, recovery resources stretched thin. These were not failures of will. They were boundaries. Like the ground beneath the Panther, they did not announce themselves as decisive until they were tested. The irony of the story lands calmly, without spectacle. The Panther was built to dominate open battle, to engage at range, to move decisively, to impose its presence on space. Yet it was undone not by a superior weapon, but by a small feature of the ground. Not by enemy brilliance, but by an absence where support was assumed. This is war's most persistent lesson. Momentum feels robust while it exists. It carries confidence with it, amplifies success, and disguises fragility. But momentum is easily disrupted. It depends on uninterrupted motion, on ground that behaves as expected, on margins that remain unspent. When those conditions fail, momentum does not degrade gradually. It disappears. Mass amplifies error. A light vehicle misjudges and jolts. A heavy one commits. The Panther's weight did not merely contribute to the incident, it transformed it. What might have been survivable became consequential. What might have been correctable became final. Power magnified the cost of being wrong. A commander can plan against enemies. Enemy doctrine can be studied, tendencies mapped, weapons anticipated. But no commander can plan against every hidden contour beneath mud and shadow. The battlefield is not static. It is shaped continuously by weather, bombardment, and use. It evolves faster than maps and assumptions can follow. That is why this story resists hero and villain. The crew did not fail. The tank did not betray them. The enemy did not outfight them in a conventional sense. Instead, the ground asserted a truth that modern war often tries to forget. Technology operates within environments it does not control. The final accounting, then, is not about loss alone. It is about recognition. Recognition that even the most advanced weapon remains subject to conditions beneath it. Recognition that dominance is situational, not absolute. Recognition that progress does not eliminate limits, it rearranges them. The airborne moment becomes the quiet center of the narrative because it captures this truth without explanation. In that instant, steel behaves unexpectedly. Confidence lifts, then falls. Everything that follows unfolds logically from that brief separation between expectation and reality. There is no need to exaggerate its significance. The war was not decided there. The front did not collapse because of one tank. But within the scale of a battalion, of an operation, of a day's momentum, it mattered completely. It revealed how thin the margin was and how easily it could be crossed. In the end, the lesson is stated without romance. War is not only a contest of courage and machines, it is a negotiation with terrain, time, and chance. Those elements do not argue. They do not warn. They simply respond when tested. The Panther's weight was meant to keep it grounded, to anchor it, protect it, and carry it forward through resistance. For a long time, it did exactly that. Until one moment, on one stretch of ground, the earth declined to cooperate. They trusted the Panther's weight to keep it grounded, until the ground itself threw it into the air.